This feels like genuine sort of practice research. It's really quite a rare thing that you sort of propose something and have really no idea what the end project is going to look like. And it's through a kind of series of quite intense experiments that it's ended up at this point. We're almost sort of like going closer and closer and deeper inside the machine and the processes of machine learning. Here we're presented with sort of fragmented images where everything starts to become unstable and starts to collapse a little bit. And it feels like we're entering the space of this sort of system of machine learning more significantly. If model collapse refers to the sort of technology starting to kind of pollute itself and not work, I want it to also reflect the material world, but of course it has material implications and environmental implications, and that also has a potential to collapse as well. So it's about, again, that duality and making connections both between the physical world and the geological and what's happening within the kind of technological system itself. When you come into the gallery space, what I wanted to evoke is this sort of feeling of a studio kind of in flux, a place where images are being made, but also it seems to be kind of in ruin as well at the same time. When I was proposing to make this project, which is now titled Variations, I had just completed a really big body of work that was really interrogating computer-generated architectural propositions. As my practice had developed from interrogating kind of photographic techniques or things that could be described as photographic that don't use a camera, it felt like the kind of most logical technology to start to investigate next. One of the things about sort of generative AI and the way that we're sort of presented with images as outputs of text to image, often we're given kind of 4 choices. I sort of thought about how one might apply that to a curatorial process and think, well, rather than making this kind of project that might tour from space to space, maybe this is something that could be, a variation on itself. The whole idea of this project is trying to sort of artistically and materially sort of reenact as a way to sort of understand these processes, to slow them down, to insert myself into them, to sort of demystify them in lots of ways. Yeah, I do feel quite vulnerable, though it's not something that I usually do, but it somehow made logical sense for it to be me. And I'm using materials that are around the studio and things that I have to hand in order to kind of reenact this stuff, and that's why it sort of made sense to work with my kid who made sense in terms of the scale, and then myself as the person inserting myself into the process as I've been doing all along. And it just happened this time that it was my hands and my body that's sort of entering the image. I'd loosely kind of designed this, the sort of 4 chapters around 4 very particular themes. So the first was around the kind of contents that are usually hidden within the kind of shipping of these materials. Then the second is about the kind of unveiling of the processes. The third is around model collapse. And finally, the fourth is about how it's all stored. The data that I collected from V2 was there was a real kind of mixture of, lots of people in the space, kind of fragmented bodies, a lot of sort of double images of people, because of course you get people looking at the work and you get their reflection, and that's sort of captured within one frame. The variations that came from that, gave me these quite interesting, quite kind of often quite ghostly or quite confused images. I was immediately struck by the fact that it gave me what looked like a painting, and my immediate kind of gut reaction, a lot of this is about instinct and fast-paced responsing, a sort of responsiveness. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, wow, okay, I'm making a painting. And it was like this very quick, fast-paced decision. There was a sort of way of like matching the pace of the technology, not sort of producing endless variations to choose from, but just kind of going with what the immediate kind of response was. When I made the paintings, I then re-photographed them and took them back into sort of editing software and started to kind of play with them and layer them with the image, the original image that I'd given as the input, and allow parts of it to come back to the surface and parts of it to disappear, and the painting kind of takes over. I think artistic play is something that is like also a really important method in making work. So, it's not a science experiment. And I think that's really important to say. And I'm trying to kind of use my camera to respond to a technology. And I think that's, in its simplest terms, I guess that's what this is. Audience interaction has been, really present in the first two variations. A big part of that is because there was an awareness of data being collected and of photographs being collected. So as soon as a camera is placed in front of you, of course there is some kind of participation from the audience. In Model Collapse, in V3, there isn't a camera, so there is going to be a different type of sort of engagement with the work. However, it does still have the reflective surfaces and the mirror wall. As soon as you place a surface where audiences can see themselves viewing the work, there is, a completely different kind of visual exchange happening, because you're not just aware of the work, but you're aware of your gaze on the work. And I would imagine that there are people photographing themselves, looking at the work, and there is this sort of, again, the feedback loop just within the way that the work is interacted with. So that's one element of the image that I really wanted to kind of bring to the forefront. And in a way, within the AI generated image itself that this refers to, this was the part that felt like the most present. And then, what happens then when my own hand kind of goes on top of it, and you sort of get this sort of slippage of fingers and real hand and a kind of actually doesn't look photographic at all. In fact, this is kind of, in a way, this feels, it sort of falls apart so much that this also could be painting as well, really. So yeah, I decided to kind of, take a photograph through this this kind of fake, weird camera that again doesn't make any sense, and just sort of insert myself into this AI generated image. I think, when I originally made this proposal, I talked about collage as being the kind of central method that I would use, partly because that's something I've used, throughout my practice as a way of collapsing space and time and, I suppose, different realms, which felt totally appropriate when trying to understand how the, geological and the technological sort of meet. And essentially this is, a project that's full of collage. It's full of kind of materials collapsing and building upon each other, but it's this kind of drawn out collage that has all of these different branches that come off it, and it isn't, they're not kind of framed within the image as you might expect. There's a lot of sort of material ambition, I think, in what I'm trying to do, and particularly as we've entered the third variation. So I think, yeah, that kind of dialogue between sort of technicians and fabricators, my own kind of artistic production and sort of conceptualization, and then the curatorial support from Photoworks and the Photographers Gallery contributes to the way that the project is turning out. What's also great about this award through Ampersand is the fact that it's not just kind of located within one short-term project, but allowing it to kind of inform a practice really over the course of a couple of years. I feel so at a point where I'm just in such a kind of period of production, and it's my favourite place to be, feeling like all I want to do is be making, and that's where I'm at the moment. And not just with this project actually, but just kind of more broadly with other projects that this has sort of informed. It's almost like this has been the sort of central project, but it has propelled all of these other things alongside it, which has been really, really exciting.